the losers of the change in the kingdoms sometimes lost their lives. And that was a possibility for Adonijah. He recognized it because of his efforts to try to usurp the throne. He recognized that his life was in jeopardy. But then we come back to Adonijah again. Pick up in verse 13. Adonijah, the son of Haggith, came to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon. And she said, "Do you come peacefully?" He said, "Peacefully." Then he said, "I have something to say to you." She said, "Speak." He said, "You know that the kingdom was mine, that all Israel fully expected me to reign." Let's stop there for a second. This is Adonijah's picture of the way it should have gone. Everybody in Israel wanted me to be king, and I should have had the throne. In his mind, this is how it's supposed to work. So he hasn't resolved this yet. Adonijah hasn't. He thinks something different needs to happen. However, continuing on in verse 15, "However, the kingdom has turned about and become my brother's, for it was his from the Lord. And now I have one request to make of you. Do not refuse me." She said to him, "Speak." He said, "Please ask King Solomon, he will not refuse you, to give me Abishag, the Shunammite, as my wife." Bathsheba said, "Very well, I will speak for you to the king." So whose name pops up again in this discussion? Abishag. Abishag is still there. There's a new king. Solomon is king. David has passed. Abishag is still there. What does that say about Abishag? Is she fearing for her life right now?
No, she's selfish.
There's no indication that her life or her position in the palace has changed. She's still there, and she's recognized by Adonijah as being someone that is still there in the palace. So there's some interesting things occurring here, that she didn't go back home, or she's no longer a part of Israel's history. She's still there, and Scripture is revealing to us that she's still recognized as an important person in the king's palace. Go ahead, Richard.
Well, by this time, David has passed away, evidently, because Solomon would not have been installed as king unless David had passed. Right?
That's right. He is king. Solomon is king now.
I don't really know what you would call her particular situation. She's not really a concubine, and she has no status whatsoever as far as holding official office in any way.
The Scripture doesn't tell us, does it? We don't know what her position is. However, it appears to be an important position, because as we continue reading, we'll see that Adonijah thinks that if he can have Abishag as his wife, that gives him a little bit of a wedge that he can get back into the palace. And so she appears to be someone important enough that it's some advantage for her to be Adonijah's wife. And so Bathsheba says, "All right, I'll speak to Solomon, the king, her son. I'll speak to him about this and see what he has to say." So verse 19, we pick up of chapter 2. "So Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him on behalf of Adonijah, and the king rose to meet her and bowed down to her, the king bowing down to his mother. Then he sat on his throne and had a seat brought for the king's mother, and she sat on his right. She said, 'I have one small request to make of you. Do not refuse me.' The king said to her, 'Make your request, my mother, for I will not refuse you.' She said, 'Let Abishag the Shunammite be given to Adonijah your brother as his wife.' King Solomon answered his mother, 'And why do you ask Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? Ask for him the kingdom also, for he is my older brother. And on his side are Abiathar the priest and Joab the son of Zeruiah.' Then King Solomon swore by the Lord, saying, 'God do so to me, and more also, if this word does not cost Adonijah his life. Now therefore, as the Lord lives, who has established me and placed me on the throne of David my father, who has made me a house as he promised, Adonijah shall be put to death today. So King Solomon sent Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and he struck him down, and he died. Solomon, in his wisdom, recognized that Adonijah is so full of pride that he will continue to be a problem for the kingdom of Israel during the entire reign, or the entire time that he is alive on earth. And so he has his stepbrother, Adonijah, executed, put to death. This is the short story of the life of, not the life, but the only record we have of this young lady, Abishag. John, do you have a comment?
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask a question. Was there some sort of passing down process with Adonijah being the older brother? Apparently there were no other brothers in line. So wouldn't it, according to their culture, move the kingship would move directly to the next son who's alive?
I would answer that with a yes and a no. Yes was the practice of passing on a birthright. Didn't necessarily apply to kings, but there was, in Adonijah's mind, he was certainly thinking, yeah, automatically he would get the throne. But David didn't get the throne from his father. So there's no real record of there being, father, the oldest son, the next oldest son. We do see that further on in the history of Israel and Judah, where sons assumed the throne of the father who was king. But that wasn't necessarily what God had in mind. And here we find, of course, that Solomon is the individual that God has selected to sit on the throne of David. So Solomon has Adonijah executed. And this provides protection to Abishag. It appears that Abishag would have had to be Adonijah's wife if if Solomon had said, okay. Either that or she would have had to escape. She didn't have too many choices. But Solomon, recognizing his brother's devious ways and having a desire to protect someone that David, his father, had cared for and loved, Solomon also chooses to protect Abishag. So she is, as far as we know, continues to stay in the palace and was someone of great value. Not a concubine, not treated as property. She was treated as with respect. Someone who was valued in the palace. So Abishag is a beautiful young maiden from the city of Shunem, from the tribe of Issachar. And we talked about Elisha and the Shunammite woman, the only other record that we have of this town, the town of Shunem. So let's talk of this hero. I'm calling her a hero. Abishag's influence. She was always in the king's presence, heard everything, saw everything, knew what was going on, understood that things were a mess. She was privy to most of the king's business. She was aware of all the drama in the king's family during the changing of the guard, but from one king to the next. She was a witness to the fighting among the families. The wives all wanted their sons to be kings. All the sons wanted to be king, especially Adonijah. But Abishag had a heroic character. She was willing to serve. We don't have any indication that she was taken from her home, from her family, and drugged back to the palace and made to serve the king. If you saw that in there, I'd love for you to show it to me. I think that she willingly decided to go. And it may have been because she loved the king. She recognized David's heart, the heart that God said was a great and wonderful heart. But she was also trustworthy. This young woman heard a lot. She understood how delicate the balance was in the nation of Israel during this time when David is nearing the end of his life. And she was privy to all that. What a great burden that could have been for her to hear all of this discussion going on. We sometimes use the term the making of the sausage that she got to witness firsthand. But it appears from the fact that Adonijah saw an opportunity that she was a highly respected person. He felt like that it would elevate his status if he was married to Abishai. But David also recognized her status. Solomon also recognized her status and is taking measures to protect her and also to eliminate a threat to his throne. And he protects Abishai. She was protected by David. She was protected by Solomon. She remained in the palace after David had passed away. So there's some things that we can learn from Abishai. This little known hero. She trusted in God. How do we know that? She respected David. She respected God's promise for the nation of Israel. She understood her place in history. And she voluntarily went to be in the palace, separated from her family. And as far as we know, she voluntarily remained celibate her entire life in service to the king. This was her way of serving, and this was her life that she chose for herself. She trusted in God, and it probably required a lot of trust during these very scary times when there was a change in the throne and the person that she had been helping had passed away. But Jimmy's reading between the lines here on some of these things, but really Scripture doesn't indicate anything but a humble servant. Someone who kept her mouth shut despite all the things that were occurring and all of the discussions that were happening around the palace about when's David going to pass, how soon can we get another king in there, what king should it be, who should the king's mother be. All of these things are happening in the palace. And it can affect the whole nation of Israel if things are not handled appropriately. She had a lot of power, and she chose not to use it. She could have shared that information with the local tabloids, and who knows what would happen. Go ahead, Lee.
She was also in a position to involve herself in the politics of the king's court. And there was power for her to seize, and she chose not to. She could have positioned herself as somewhat of a gatekeeper. She could have, you have to go through her to get access to David. The king's not feeling well right now, you can't see him. She did none of that. She simply fulfilled whatever her role was. And to me, that's a lesson in of itself for us in the church.
Absolutely.
Not to engage in the politics of it and not to try to usurp or seize power that's not rightfully allocated.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Absolutely right. She is a hero. She's a heroic example for us to study and to emulate. She was loyal to David. All that she did centered around providing the very best for David, her patient, if you will, caring for him. That's a heroic thing for someone to do, and she was certainly a hero. She, taken from her homeland, taken from her family, taken to a strange place she'd never been, spending the rest of her life, as far as we know, in someone else's home, in the palace of the king, being privy to all this that is going on during this very difficult time. She still remained humble, she remained loyal, and she was protected. So Lee summed it up wonderfully. If we are to be a hero like Abishai, we are to look for those opportunities when God calls us to serve, and to serve faithfully and loyal. That's the hero that Abishag was. Well, it looks like we've about run out of time. So I appreciate your interest and your comments that you've made. Look forward to being with you in worship in just a few moments. Thank you very much.